In the account from this passage from St. Mark's Gospel that we read in today's Mass, we see how busy, how occupied our Lord was with the cares of those around him. He was pressed on every side, pulled here and there, approached by those who had faith, ridiculed by those who did not. And yet his regard for everyone was direct and personal. He could have healed the synagogue official's child as he had done before without going to the man's home. But the man requested his presence and our Lord followed him. And in the process, as he passed through the crowd, he healed also the woman with the hemorrhage who had reached out to touch him. Today we celebrate the feast day of St. John Bosco, who also made himself available to those in need, in particular the street children, especially boys of Turin. And he had a tremendous effect on these young people, and the Salesian order which he founded continues to do so down to this day. And the reason is that St. John Bosco was like Christ. He intervened in the lives of these young people directly and personally, and he brought them to a change of heart and a change of life, had a profound impact on young people. Catholic education is a very important thing, and there's this sort of common urban myth, not entirely a myth, about the ferociousness of Catholic education in the United States, the nuns who were so terrible. And the stories are not entirely untrue, but Catholic education is not an easy thing. Education of children is not an easy thing. Dealing with one another is not an easy thing. But there are far more edifying and beautiful stories about the way in which young people have been affected by people like St. John Bosco and sisters who have taken the time to intervene directly in the lives of young people. But the fact of the matter is that changing people's lives is a work of God and not a work of man. And St. John Bosco understood this. And so when he intervened in the lives of these young people, he was, from this point of view of the world in which he lived at the time, he was very unorthodox. He had to actually defend his method of education because the officials in Turin were not pleased with him having all these rowdy young boys together in one place, many of whom had a record of misbehavior and vandalism and street crime. And his method was unorthodox because he didn't use extreme measures. He didn't control them the way popular educators at the time were attempting to do. And so he wrote a little pamphlet at one point to defend his method of education, which he called the Preventative Method of Education, which was based on three principles. Three principles which he applied to these young people, but which really is at the heart of conversion for anyone. The first of the principles was reason. He taught them virtue, but he taught them what virtue means, why it's important. He taught them about vice, what it means, and why it should be avoided. Because in our Catholic faith, we always have to remember that we are very different than, for example, the Muslims, who believes that God is arbitrary, that he's capricious, that he contradicts himself, that he simply is this infinite will with no mind that simply commands us to obey without giving us any reason to do so. God deserves to be obeyed simply because he's God, but he teaches us the truth. Catholic morality is cast by Blessed Pope John Paul II as the splendor of the truth. It's doing the truth. It's radiating the truth through our lives, through our choices, through our correspondence to the will of God. So he did everything in his power to help young people understand the truths of the faith and why God asks us to do what he commands us. The second principle was religion, because he knew that at the heart of any change in one's life that is really positive and directed towards salvation, that it has to be motivated by a love for God. And what is given to us in our holy religion, the creed, the sacraments, prayer, and the code of morality, these things come together in order to give us the strength from within our hearts and our minds, to do the will of God. And so he strengthened them through the sacraments, in particular, most especially the sacrament of confession. He used to talk to them every night and tell them a story or talk to them about what was going on in the school. He read their souls because he was a mystic, but he always kept them close to the sacrament of confession, and even raised a child from the dead in order to hear his confession. So the second principle was reason. The third principle, he said, was kindness. His method was preventative. He prevented his charges from falling into sin or falling away from God or falling away from the obligations of their studies by living with them, by spending time with them, by pouring himself out. He and his confreres, the Salesians, sacrificed themselves for the boys, made themselves available, and chose to avoid outbursts of anger and extreme measures to correct them in preference to being with them all the time and just being a constant influence. So reason, religion, and kindness were the principles by which St. John Bosco made tremendous strides in the education of young people. And again, these principles can be applied to anybody who's actively involved in the apostolate. Indeed, it can be applied to our living with one another, our practicing the corporal and spiritual works of mercy towards each other. It could be applied to our relations to the members of our family with whom we have many difficulties and problems and strife and difficulties in our relationships. In the end, conversion and the choice for virtue is a free choice. It's a personal choice. And we are only God's instruments. We can only work under His and through His grace for the conversion and sanctification of souls. It's what our Lord did. Our Lord was patient with those for whom He came to save. He suffered and He died for us. He lived with us, and He showed us the way, not only by teaching us and reprimanding us, but by living with us and suffering our weaknesses. May we have the strength to do this also, and we can invoke today St. John Bosco to give us the strength to do it.